Hello,
Right.
everyone, and welcome to the International Touring Post-Brexit workshop. Before I start, I'd like to remind you that automated captions are available. Notes, slides, and a recording of this workshop will be shared with participants next week. My name is Irene Segura. I lead on international relations and talent development at Extracts, a Manchester-based development organization for outdoor arts. I'm a white woman in my 30s. I have long brown hair, which is tied up in a bun today, and I'm wearing a black and white dress. I'm standing in front of a window, so there's quite a lot of light behind me. My pronouns are she and her. In this practical workshop, we will talk you through the process of preparing for international touring in a post-Brexit world. Step by step, we will cover the basics of what you need to do, from checking if you need a visa or work permit to looking at insurance, tax, and movement of goods, with examples of what needs doing depending on the country you're traveling to. This workshop is aimed at outdoor artists who are at the very beginning of their international touring journey. If you're interested in hearing from fellow artists who have some experience in planning and touring in Europe, we do have regular open conversation sessions that you can join for free. The next one is on 24th of May. And we also have various resources available on our website. So please see the links that my colleague will put in the chat. This event is supported by Arts Council England as part of Extract's ongoing work to support the outdoor arts professionals to continue to work internationally post-Brexit. The workshop will be facilitated by the brilliant creative consultant Nadine Patel. Nadine has worked in the arts sector for over 27 years, supporting artists and art organizations to develop and strengthen their opportunities and growth. She's a mentor and international consultant on various projects and the co-author of Must Go On, a practical guide for the UK performance sector, touring work across Europe post-Brexit. She was recently appointed to be on the European Commission's pool of culture experts, supporting the European Capitals of Culture programme. I will now pass it over to you, Nadine.
Hi all, my name is Nadine. My pronouns are she, her. I am a tired middle-aged woman with big glasses and a very bright red top to keep me perky. Welcome all. As we discussed today, we'll be looking at touring to Europe post-Brexit. Just to give you a sense of today's format, I'll be doing a sort of introduction where we're at, how we're at post-Brexit. Then I will be doing an overview and looking at some of the terminology and what's changed and what's not changed. And then we're going to deep dive into certain countries. I've picked a selection of countries that I think the outdoor arts are more likely to be connected to, so that we can look at how legislation and changes country by country. And then we'll do a bit of signposting to some other guides and useful information and resources, and then Q&As. This is a really interactive workshop. If we were in the room, I'd expect us to have this more as a sort of conversation, not just a presentation. So because the information is also so murky and ever-changing, if anybody has experience and they want to put their hand or chat or mention something or contribute to the conversation, please do. By no means am I the sole expert of this topic. I don't think that really exists. But it will be really a kind of a basic step-by-step guide. So I know some of you are quite experienced, so it will be a bit of a recap of some of the information you might know. But the main point is that I hope by going through this sort of step-by-step process, it kind of demystifies the whole process, and at least you'll know where to go to get the information you need to move. So just a sort of introduction of where we're at. Britain joined the European Union in 1973. There was a referendum in 2016 where the UK voted to leave. And in 2020, we started that process through a one-year transition. And in 2021, we officially left the EU Customs Union and single market. There's a sort of conflicting position when it comes to touring. There is an offer that the UK has presented to European artists, and offers that are being made from Europe back to the UK. And there's a bit of a tension there. So I just want to just be clear about what the UK position is for European artists coming, is that they, no matter where they come from within the EU, can come for up to a month without the need for a formal sponsorship or a work visa. If they go on and extend beyond a month, then sponsorship but not visas will be required between 1 to 3 months. And beyond that, they do need a visa as well. So most arts organisations that regularly invite international artists have sponsorship licence. So this is something that they can process themselves. And they have to additionally prove that they have a certain amount of money in the bank. This isn't always checked, but the theory is they have to prove that they could support themselves for that. So this is something that, like I said, is blanketed across the EU. And for small performing arts engagement, that usually makes it quite possible for people to come in without it being too complicated. There is a request that European artists prove they're arts professionals and that they are invited by an established UK partner with a sponsorship licence. And there's a list of who those sponsorship licence holders are. And currently it's the Arts Council England who are the ones that endorse, are the endorsing body appointed by the Home Office to say whether someone is in fact an artist or not. It would go through them. And recently, in the last couple of years, the UK Arts Info Point was set up. This is a sort of a mobility info point. There are counterparts across Europe, and this is the UK version, which is funded by all the arts councils. And this is where you would go and seek advice regarding European artists visiting the UK in terms of tax, social security, and visas. And I've just put a little sheet here to just give you a sense of the sort of prices involved. So if somebody, sorry, there's a question.
I just wondered, Nadine, when you were talking about the fact that EU nationals can come to the UK and work for a month without the need to have a permit. I wondered if does that also apply for example, artists who might want to be working with UK
collaboration,
collaborations,
yeah. So I'm going to slightly signpost later on in the guide that Irene mentioned at the beginning that I co-hosted. I deep dived into countries like Italy, Spain, Germany, and so on. And at the bottom, I've also said if you've got a German collaborator coming to the UK, what are the logistics and requirements in terms of visa and sponsorships and where to look. But yeah, it's a lot easier basically for Europeans to come in for up to a month if they're EU passport holders, without there being too many cost implications. And then if they tend to go beyond the 1 month, there are now certain charges that are additionally added, which you can see here. Yeah, but most engagements are up to a month, really, occasionally 1 to 3. On the other hand, the EU position, and this is where it gets knotty, and this is, you know, in June 2021, Lord Frost, who was the Brexit chief negotiator, said the problem is this is a tension they can't see being fixed, is that fundamentally, we are not able in the EU to provide a kind of EU-wide agreement. Every country has different legislation. Some countries are able to facilitate and make it easier, but there isn't a sort of a cross-EU agreement about visa-free travel in Europe. The UK government recently claimed to have secured visa-free travel in the EU, but if you unpick it, actually the legislation wasn't that different from what had been agreed before, and it's certainly not a clean up to 1 month. You can do this for certain countries, it will be a couple of days. For certain countries, it will be a couple of weeks. For certain countries, it will be up to. So it just still means that you have to look on a case-by-case basis. So it's not a sort of a blanket agreement across Europe. It's the DCMS that has taken the lead on resolving issues post-Brexit travel for creative workers, and some announcements have been made, but detail doesn't appear to be clear. So the thing to do to, I think now post-COVID, as people are moving and coming across problems, to make sure that the DCMS are aware of what those problems are, so they are in a better position to lobby. There are certain unions, like the musician unions, that I think have done an excellent job in representing the sector. I think in the performing arts, it's been a little bit more complicated because there isn't one body that represents the whole performing arts sector quite as neatly as the musicians unions. So you can lobby via unions, of course, or through extracts, who I know have conversations directly with the DCMS. The European movement is a body that supported Britain going into the EU in 1973, and they're still active now, trying to get us back into the EU. So they might be somebody you want to connect with, or you write to your local MP or speak to the Arts Council. But I think as information appears, we need to feed that back so they are better, they have the information to hand to do the proper lobbying that's required. But that's the position we are at now. The UK feels that it has presented a really good scenario and it wants the EU to do the equivalent. And that's really not possible because the EU doesn't work in this kind of blanket across Europe when it comes to mobility. Right, so I just want to go back a little bit and just talk about terminology, just to be clear what we're talking about. So the visa is the official document that allows somebody to go legally into a foreign country. A work permit is the official document giving you permission to work and do a job in that country. Unfortunately, some countries in Europe swap those terminologies around. So sometimes they use visa when they mean work permits and work permits when they mean visas, which is why when I'll dig in to the countries, I will say, okay, this is what they're saying exactly. But in your head, you should know that if you're a British passport holder, you do not need a visa to enter Europe and the Schengen area, but you can only stay 90 days out of every 180 days. That includes if you go on holiday. So if you're planning to go on holiday to Europe and to work, you have to make sure that you are not doing more than 90 days out of every 180 days. After 180 days, it goes back to zero, and you can add another 90 days to your stay. They've created an online calculator, which I've put a link to, so it helps you kind of keep track. And particularly if you have a company, it's really important to know who's going on holiday and what those 90 days are, and not just to think about the paid engagement that you might do, so that none of you overstay that kind of 90 days rule. But if you stay within that 90 days rule, you don't need a visa. At the end of 2022, everybody would also need to get an ETIAS travel authorization. This is kind of a security clearance. It's going to be about €10. You would register for it online. It just means you've all been security checked, and then you can carry on traveling visa-free in Europe for up to 5 years. It makes no difference to the visa-free rules and the 90 days. This is literally an additional security check, but a background check to make sure that nobody's done anything and still can travel across Europe. With insurance and healthcare, and I'm going to repeat it because I saw recently on Twitter sort of flurry of activity about it was your last day to apply for the European Health Insurance Card and so on and so forth. The European Health Insurance Card has existed for a while. It's still valid if you have it and you're travelling to the EU countries. If it's expired, and the reason for your European Health Insurance Card is that if you were to go to the doctors, say in France, which is the chargeable visit, you can reclaim some of that cost when you come back to the UK. And this European Health Insurance Card is being phased out post-Brexit and will be replaced by a global health insurance card. But if you own a European Health Insurance Card, that's still valid for now. If you don't, all you have to do is apply for the Global Health Insurance Card, and you do it through your NHS website. And it, like I said, it just means that you can be reimbursed in certain costs that you might incur should you end up having to need medical care when you're abroad. You need to check when you're doing health insurance, because of the nature of your job that you might need additional health insurance. And with COVID, you're going to have a little look as well at what's available at the moment. And insurance contracts that existed pre-Brexit might need to be renegotiated now that the UK is a third country to the EU. The third country is a terminology that is used to any country that isn't part of the EU. So you'll hear it as well quite often with European funding. So with Creative Europe funding, which we used to be able to be lead partners on, we are no longer able to be part of that cohort of lead partners, but we still can engage as a third country, which means just a country removed from Europe. If I'm talking too fast or you want me to go over anything, just let me know. Oh, we've got a question here from Irene.
I just wondered, because Edward was saying that he's got an international booking kind of near, like approaching. I just wondered what that experience was at the moment of getting or renegotiating insurance contracts. I don't know if you've kind of started doing that yet, Edward, but I just wondered.
What actually happened was that the fee offered by the festival didn't cover our costs, so we've had to cancel it because it's just, it would have been, I mean, it wouldn't have covered our costs pre-Brexit, so it was just a question of I've kind of tried to avoid thinking about this until the problem crops up, just simply because you could go mad, I think, trying to work out what's what. But no, we didn't. It kind of stopped quite quickly when it was realised that and that's another problem which I may well mention later in the when it's a Q&A, more of a Q&A thing. But it's certainly no, we didn't get that far because the dialogue petered out.
There is also, just so you're aware, I know the UK Arts Info Points do informal coffee meetings once a month, and I joined a couple, and it was people who'd been through certain processes and were able to say, okay, this is exactly what's happened to me, this is the cost, and so on and so forth. So they've been quite useful as well, to just get insight of like, okay, who exactly did you speak to and what did you get, and what, you know, the good kind of sharing as well. But yeah, the costs are making things more and more prohibitive. That's no doubt about it.
Well, if I could just say one more thing, I think some of the examples that the Arts Council give, I remember when the thing first came up, and the Arts Council had put together a sort of do's and don'ts, but the companies that they chose were sort of NPO companies working for extremely well-financed French festivals, which the most, I would imagine, sort of most companies who getting gigs, you know, working in Europe, they're going to be the small, the festival that's just pulled out is a small Dutch festival, who simply don't have the budgets for all the behind the scenes costs. And I think that's the big issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they can, so one more thing and then I'll mute.
No, I completely understand. I mean, forced entertainment, I know, is one of the case studies that I spoke to, and, you know, if you're getting invited to Festival d'Automne, it's absolutely not representative of the average person.
No, and I think it's a kind of double storm, because there's COVID, there's Brexit, but there's also shrinking arts budgets across Europe as well. So all those nice weekend gigs we used to ping pong backwards and forwards have just been made very complicated.
Yeah. Right. I'll just, yeah, so, and I just want to sort of, so with tax, as with everything, but each country sets its own tax rules. The main concern will be that a country wants to make sure that you are paying your tax. And they want to make sure you don't come to their country and get paid without declaring it. Okay, so nearly all European countries have an agreement with the UK to avoid you being taxed twice. But one of the things they might do is try to withhold your tax in the country and return it to you once everything's been cleared. But they won't return it to you in cash. It will be done as a credit once you've submitted your tax return. So that can be a real cash flow problem. So to avoid them withholding your tax at source, and there are ways of doing that. You need to apply for a certificate of residence to show that you're a resident of the UK, and this is your main country of residence, and this is where you pay your tax. You then would need to get a form. Now, like I said, when we deep dive into countries, it will step by step show, okay, if you're going to Italy, this is where you click to get that certificate. And if you go to Germany, this is where you click. So don't worry too much, but I just want to explain to you the process is that you then need to get a form from them so that they don't withhold that tax from you. It can be quite complicated, but it can really save you the problem of having that tax withheld. If you don't have a cash flow problem, then and you're happy to just deal with tax credits, then you can ignore this. But most people, that will prove to be a problem. So you do need to go through these steps prior to traveling. If you weren't able to get that certificate in time, you suddenly got a gig, it's for next week, you've decided to take it regardless, and you have been taxed, then you can claim for your foreign tax credit relief when you do your overseas income reporting in your tax return. And how much you then get, yes, and exactly, the tax office are very slow at getting back, and how much relief you get will then depend on each double tax agreement. There is a guide which I'll be signposting later on. There's an organisation called PEARL, P-E-A-R-L-E, and they've created guides which really explain what the percentage is per country, what you could potentially lose, what tax might be withheld. But basically what they will be looking for is tax certificate, including the contract, to be clear of which bit is the performance fee, what is the tax paid on top of the net fee, and all this paperwork so that you can be clear about what you will be reimbursed on and how you then get those tax credits. But like I said in this presentation as well, all these underlines are links which will take you to HMRC and give you the exact detail and the overview regarding the tax agreements and how you then claim for your tax relief if it's been held at source. For VAT, artists don't need to add VAT on their fees in other countries. It's up to the presenter in the EU who is liable for VAT. With social security, it's the same concept. It relates to your national insurance contributions, and whether you're self-employed or employed through a company, they want to make sure that you are making the contributions based on that paid engagement. So to make sure to declare that you are paying national insurance, etc., your social security contributions in the UK, you get something called an A1 form, and you have to apply for it in advance. It used to be much quicker to get those A1 forms processed. It seems to be really slow at the moment. What I'm sort of saying to people is when you used to tour to the US, you had a kind of a 6-month lead time because the bureaucracy is so complicated or time consuming. I would say with Europe, you know, a 2-month lead is really useful, particularly it's the first time that you do it, so that you can get these forms, because there does seem to be a backlog and things that used to be processed quite quickly are taking a really, really long time. to go through at the moment. With moving goods, there's a lot of talk about carnets. Carnets have always existed. This isn't so much a post-Brexit rule. An ATA carnet is basically a document that permits you to travel with goods tax-free and duty-free on some sort of temporary gig. There is a cost involved. It's usually around £300, and it's issued by the Chamber of Commerce, and it's valid not just across Europe but beyond. And it's usually stamped at an airport port, and it sort of facilitates your entry to a country with any goods that you might have. Whether you need one or not really is dependent on what you're bringing over. If what you're bringing is small, adding an extra £300 may not be worth it. It really depends on the risk you want to take in terms of potentially being stopped and potentially then having additional tax put on your goods. So it really depends on the sort of props that you're bringing. If you are bringing a suitcase with some costumes and a couple of props, I think you can get away with it. But if you are really starting to travel with quite a big set or quite an extensive list of goods, then it is worth getting a carnet. But it isn't. It is available and useful for the whole year. It's not just a one-off. So it's an investment that would cover you, particularly if you're doing several gigs over 12 months. If you've got pyrotechnics or instruments with ivory, there are extra bits of paperwork and legislation that you have to fill in. But there are, and in the guides that I'll be mentioning later, I list a couple of organisations and companies that are really good at filling in ATA carnet forms for you, if you're not familiar with the process. So I think if you know that you're going to be touring to more than one engagements over a period of 12 months, and you do have quite a lot of equipment with you, it's worth investing. If you are able to spread that cost across the promoters that might be engaging you, then obviously that's the ideal way. But that kind of depends. That's kind of how you spread your cost across the tool, and if you're able to. And at the moment, I think for the next 18 to 24 months, engagements are going to be a little bit more ad hoc, and it's going to be harder to sort of put a tour together like we used to do in the good old days. And I hope that will come back, but as Edward was mentioning as well, you know, obviously with Brexit and COVID and the current situation financially for a lot of arts organisations across Europe, that kind of neat touring packs, you know, schedules is a little bit more complicated at present. But the hope is that beds down over the next couple of years. With transport, if you are travelling, you just need to be aware that, you know, you need to have a GB UK sticker at the back of your vehicle. You need to have a green card, which is just the proof that your vehicle is insured. Similarly, on the guide, I have a link to all the country in terms of all the individual requirements that there might be that are specific to a country regarding you travelling there. The kind of sticking point, and I know some of you have raised this issue already, is around sabotage and road haulage. So one of the post-Brexit bits of legislation which has sort of appeared and made things a bit more complicated is that if you are touring and you take a vehicle to Europe, you can only do 3 stops in total before you have to go back to the UK. You can't do 4 countries. You would have to do 3, go back, and then go out again for your 4th gig. So that is really problematic for some tours. What is unclear at the moment, and there seems to be conflicting reporting back, and this is a little bit dependent on who you see at customs and who you're traveling with, is that some people believe that if you have a European-based company and you hire a lorry or a van in Europe, then you are exempt of this 3-stop rule, and that has worked for some people. the problem is for some custom officers is they're saying, well, the goods inside that van are British and not European, and therefore that 3-stop rule applies. So this is one of those sticky things which we are discussing with DCMS, we're discussing with Arts Council England, and raising that there seems to be a conflict, and it's very much dependent on what happens to you when you get to customs, to who kind of is kind of enforcing this legislation. But the deal would be, in theory, definitely if you've got a British vehicle with British goods, you can only do 3 stops before you have to go back. The confusion is, if I'm hiring a European vehicle, does that apply or not? Does the 3-country rule? Yes, it's about the 3 ports that you would travel to, cross. So yes, you can only, unless it's kind of like going through the port is considered the stop, as far as I'm aware, unless somebody. So where you would get your carnet stamp, that's right. So it's even if you're not doing the gig in that country, if they're having to stamp your country to get through that country, then that is considered the stop. So that's really problematic if you're traveling through Europe and you know, as you know. So this is one of the things I haven't got a clean answer to give you, because some people have had no problems and some people have had problems. And this is one of those issues when the deal was made, people weren't thinking about this kind of detail and level of impact that it was had. They were really thinking about big scale haulage. And so, like I said, I'm aware that the Arts Council have done some research in this, and they've been really trying to get to the bottom of this, but this is a kind of top level discussion that's taking place. So at the moment, the recommendation is that you get an EU-based haulier to kind of transport your equipment, and that seems to be working for everyone, but some people have come across problems because the goods inside the van were seen as British. No, so the stops don't count in terms of if you're doing 3 cities in a country, then that's fine. It really is about crossing borders. Sorry, Edward, do jump in.
I just wanted to find out what determines whether you need a haulage company. Is it if you have a big prop in the back of a van, or is it if you have props which don't fit into your van and which have to be, because we, a specific example, the show we have at the moment is, it fits into our van, it's a long wheelbase van. So if we're going Hull, Rotterdam, we're immediately freight. But it's just not clear where it changes from you having to have a haulier.
Yeah, it's when so it's basically if the prop that you have doesn't fit into kind of a domestic vehicle, and you're paying someone to take it, then that becomes road haulage.
Right, so if our show fits into our van, but our van isn't a small transit, it's a longer transit, what happens then? That's what's not clear on any of the...
No, and that I will, so my understanding, what kind of license have you got? It's based on the travel, the license.
It's not an HGV.
Okay.
I mean, it's just you can drive one of these transits with a normal driving license. I think it's when you go up to 7.5 tons that it's now changed. You used to be able to do it, but it's changed, I think.
I think it still applies because I think it's still about the movement of goods. And it still means you can't go through a certain amount of countries if it's declared, based on what I've read. I know somebody who's doing some of the research for Arts Council England, so I can ask them if there's any latest update about that, if it's your own vehicle. Let me just put a note of that and send that to you direct.
That just seems to me to be that's the kind of the sticking point for us is
Yeah.
just that I mean, obviously we're used to just leaping in the van and driving over there, like everyone used to, but it's at what point does it become haulage, and at what point is it just, you know, a bicycle, and, you know, something that you can fit into a small transit van.
Yeah, well, and I think with some of the things that people are doing at the moment, those that I've spoken to are really rethinking about what they bring over and what can be you know, provided or stored in Europe, which obviously doesn't apply in this case, because it is sticky and we don't know at the moment, and we're having problems to figure it out, you know. So it's
yes, it's sorry, I'm hogging the thing.
No,
here.
go on.
It's just that the what we have is very bespoke. It's not something that you can. It's not. We don't have any technical things we can ask a festival to supply. So it's things that have been specially made to create an effect, and also a lot of work put into trying to get it to fit into a vehicle. So
so if I'm afraid from what I've read and understood and spoken to, it would be considered road haulage. You're moving a good in a vehicle, and therefore you're coming from the UK, you are limited to the amount of stops that you're doing.
Right.
At the moment.
Yeah.
I think that is something that they're trying to negotiate quite hard on, because obviously you're not doing it to sell the goods, you're not doing it because you're importing, exporting, you're bringing goods around. And I think that's where there is the feel that there might be some movement, because it's not for profit, you know, it is literally the movement of good for a performance. And so that's where the lobbying is going, to say, look, this is not the same as you bringing crates of tomatoes. You know, we're not going to sell these. We are bringing them to do a performance.
No, but maybe I can. I have another question, which is more complicated, but maybe it'd be better to introduce it into another part of the tool.
Will do. Okay, we'll go back to that then.
Yeah.
Right. So this is. Now I'm going to talk about the deep diving into countries. So with the overview, I sort of said these are some of the key steps, but now we're just literally going to go through some of these countries and see what the difference is in terms of what you would have to do and what the legislation is per country. So I'm going to share my screen in a different way. So I'm going to just go to, here we go. Right. So this is the guide that I've co-wrote, and this is based on small independent performing arts companies touring to Europe for up to a kind of a month. So all the things that I'm talking about are within a month, sometimes up to 3 months, depending on the legislation. But that's important to know. These are not for long-term engagement. I've really based it on what I thought was the most likely, which is you go over for the weekend, as it was mentioned, or you're invited for a week. And within that, there's a whole set of countries that we can go and look at. Now, just because I'm showing this screen, let me just quickly, there we go, I can still see you now in case. So the first one, for example, is Italy. I'm just going to open the link to Italy. So as mentioned, going to Italy, you can still work visa-free for less than 90 days. But with Italy, you do need a work permit. So as you would see here, you would then click onto that link and it would show you what you have to do to fill in the paperwork for the work permit. And the Italian host would be expected to sponsor you. It can take up to 2 months to get your work permit once you've submitted all your documents. So, and part of that is because all your documentation needs to be legalised and translated into Italian. And so that can be quite complicated. And so sometimes, you know, you would have to give up to 4 months of the lead time for that. If you're a British citizen entering Italy to undertake paid work, there is a separate requirement to apply for a residence permit within 8 working days of entering Italy. So there's another link that you would have to do to fill another form. This is Italy. Like I said, you could go to another country and have none of this, all right? So it's also worth thinking when you're offered an engagement from a European festival or venue, just to have a look at these sort of bits and be like, well, would I have the lead up frame to actually do this? Is it worth the time? Do I have the capacity within the company to go through all of this? And then there's a breakdown of what the costs are involved in order to get this work permit. And similarly, as we have in the UK, the need to get sponsorship for arts companies to prove they are artists and they're recognised as such. For self-employed work permits, artists similarly would have to prove they are artists and well established. So this can be problematic for really emerging artists. Otherwise, sometimes if you're able to show a kind of a promotional marketing or a link to any press or anything, just to demonstrate that you are recognised by somebody external to you as artists. So yeah, it can be really tricky. I would say Italian bureaucracy is the most bureaucratic or most complicated at times, and so just to plan well ahead, and there can be some to and fro. It's the tax issues. I'm not going to go into too much detail because that was mentioned in the overview, but just a couple of additional points that it's good to negotiate in British sterling if you can, so that you're clear about the amount that will be transferred, to look at bank charge costs and see if it can be covered or at least split with the person that is going to be transferring the money, the host organisation, or at least consider it in your original fee, and clarify the per diem rate in advance, including the travel dates. So yeah, you just need to have a little think about that as well. Yes, Sylvia.
Just to make you aware, Nadine, there are a couple of questions in the chat related.
Oh, I can't see them when I'm saying this.
Oh, sorry, I will read them out for you.
Yes, please.
So, sorry, well, just one sec. And he was asking, is the work permit per performer?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So it's everybody who's being paid for that engagement. Yes. So anybody who's getting paid.
And Anya was saying, does this apply to non-UK residents within the company as well, if we are a registered UK company or charity?
Then it all kind of depends. Yeah, so then it all will depend on what the visa requirements are. So if you are non-UK, but you might be another European passport holder, there will be a different set of regulation to whether you're a non-European one. So that would then have to be looked at. But if you look at the link to the work permit, which takes you to this Italian portal, which explains all the immigration, if you click on that, it will then explain to you breakdown by breakdown, depending on what your passport is. I am doing a kind of UK-based British passport holder in this, but within it, you can break down and have a look at all the individual situations. Similarly, so with the A1 certificates for social security, there are some countries that are more insistent on them than others. Certainly Italy and France will sometimes refuse to let you perform if you haven't got those forms already. Other countries will be a little bit more lenient with that. So on this breakdown, you can see where to apply for them. And like I said here, I've put a line that, you know, they may stop a performance if you don't have that paperwork to hand. Sorry, I've just got to move that so I can actually see what I'm doing. There is a difference in the UK, in Italy, regarding tax, depending on what you are doing. So it's not always the same if you're a performer or if you're a technician or if you're a director or if you're a stage designer. There will be different tax implications of that. So similarly, I would have a look at the Italian website, or Pearl, which also I mentioned before, which kind of has really good guidance on that, because it won't be the same laws that are applied in terms of tax. I can see there's a couple of I can't see the chats, I just can see the numbers. So if anybody just wants to raise their hand or shout out, that'd be really useful. No, oh, it's all right then. And it's the same, like if you're the visual artist, you're the set designer, it will be a different tax law. So there isn't a kind of overview that I can just say this is how it applies to everybody. You don't have to dig down on who's getting what. And then, as I mentioned in the overview, then this is where you would go in order to avoid that tax being withheld at source. So how to get your certificate residency and so on and so forth. For the ATA, I've put a link to the Italian Customs Office. It's worth having a look because this is something Edward mentioned as well. Sometimes custom officers interpret the legislation in their own way, and it's really dependent on who you see. So it's worth to have a little look so you have the information to hand prior to going, so that if somebody says something that you don't think is correct, you can actually show that, you know, that's not correct. So if you have a question, speak to the customs office in advance of the travel, because some countries will be stricter than others in terms of what needs to be supplied. I'm still seeing chat numbers go up. Is there anything that's relevant that I should be aware of?
Don't worry, Nadine, we will let you know. We're just sharing links and things like that.
All right, okay, great. On here, I've also listed where you can apply for your ATA carnets and more information about it, and where you can get expert advice about getting ATA carnets. So I won't go too much into that. I had mentioned though, if you travel with instruments, that an additional paperwork is required. This is called a site certificate, and you probably need it if you've got ivory on your musical instrument, and you have to have that pass through the nothing to declare exit. And it's the same, you have to be aware of any animal products that might be used in your costumes and props, and that might include feathers and so on and so forth, in which case you need to have a site certificate. So if you are bringing things around, just have a little look. With pyrotechnics, it's the same. You will need an additional certificate with a kind of a notified body to just make sure that the product is, you know, just so it's aware that it's hazardous and what it is and how you can travel. When driving, so as I mentioned, you kind of break down there's government guidance on every country and how you can drive there and what you need and what's additional, what the vehicle logbooks, what might be additional and specific that you need to have legally when traveling. So if you're bringing your own vehicle, in this case, you will need to have a reflective jacket. Yes, there's a hand.
I'm just reading out a question from Neem,
yeah,
which when you were talking about instruments and sometimes needing that additional certificate, he's asking, what about African drums with animal skin on the head? I'm guessing that would apply.
That would apply. It's any animal product that's used, and often that is in the case of instruments. Yeah, so you just need to get that certificate. Yeah, so just an example, what you don't need in the UK is to have a warning. You know, you don't need to have a first aid box in your vehicle at all times. You do when you're traveling in Europe. So on there will be a list of what is needed, and the RAC website is really good at sort of breaking down country by country what's required. For example, in France, you will need an additional certificate if you're traveling through certain cities because they have low emission zones, or they have anti-pollution legislation, so you can only travel on certain days, and in which case, I mean, some of these things will only cost you a couple of euros, but you have to have that badge to put in your car in order to travel through that city on that particular day and that particular week, and so on and so forth. So it just requires a little bit of thinking. Not all of this, by the way, is post-Brexit rules. This was all there before, but it's just to be aware of each step about getting from A to Z. There are lots of freight and shipping companies if you do use them for performance. I've listed 3 there that are regularly used and super well informed. And for smaller parcels, you can also use UPS for sending equipment or small props. There are different thresholds to the cost of what you're sending. So if what you're sending to Italy is under 150 euros, you can just send it through UPS, and there are no custom charges. If the cost of what you're sending is above, then there are some custom charges that you need to be aware of. And if you have an ATA carnet, then that simplifies the process. If you don't, then there is another set of papers that you have to kind of consider. I mean, I think the main thing you're gathering from all of this is if you're a small independent company and you get an invitation, you have quite a lot of paperwork to complete. Hopefully these guides are literally like, click here, do this piece of paper, click here, do this piece of paper, and it's as useful as possible as in that sense. And once you've been through the process for one country, and once you've been for it, certainly through Italy, then going to the Netherlands will be a lot easier. But you do need to think about the capacity you have within your organisation or as an independent artist in travelling at the moment, particularly as we have these sticking points and not everyone, including government and custom officers, are clear about what the rules are. But hopefully these sort of guides, and it's not just my guide, there are others, will give you a sort of tick list of what you have to do, so you have a better understanding and it's slightly less freakish or scary to go through. With Sabotage, as I mentioned, these are all the permits, and these are the sort of issues we're having at the moment that we sort of touched upon before. I don't know, Edward, if this is the point you wanted to raise your other more complicated question.
Yes. Our show involves, basically it's a maze that's set out as a model city, and the audience go through the maze, but before they do so, we give them a mask so that they look like Godzilla wandering through a tiny city. So the masks, we've designed and made them, and we give them to the audience. They don't cost anything for the audience to give, but the implication is that we can get through about 300 in a day. So there's going to be 2 boxes, say for a weekend gig, a hypothetical weekend gig, there's going to be 2 boxes coming into the country, but if it goes well, there won't be any box coming back. And although in the UK we do ask for, in a pre-Brexit thing, it's a new show, but so it hasn't been the case, but we do ask for a donation just to cover the cost of us printing these things, so they're not cheap to do. But I'm just wondering, what I could see it being the lamest excuse to a skeptical customs officer is, but we didn't sell them. But they disappeared, and they look like merchandise. So
yeah, I think it would go in the merch, but it could, I don't know, Irene and Sylvia, if you've come across this.
We haven't come across this
No,
yet, to be honest.
I would fear that it would look like merch.
Yeah, oh well, I think it absolutely would, but what we're trying to do is to get the festival to cover the costs of the printing, and then we can just give them out without having to ask anyone. But it just looks like we just look like weasels, basically, trying to explain this. And so I'm guessing it's just going to cost more money.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. I think they could, if they wanted to, be really. I mean, I'm hoping that, you know, these sorts of situations, it's so small, like, is it worth the bother compared to the bigger issues that they have to deal with? But at the moment, if you are doing it by the guidance, by the law, then yes, that would be considered, that could potentially be considered as merch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The best thing is to have them produced over there, Edward. Like, if you have a model that they can then print out locally and you don't have to take them, because if they then become part of your carnet and you don't bring them back anymore.
Yeah, we've looked.
I'm sure you thought about it already.
We've looked at it. It's sort of easy, as somebody's going to have to take this is my problem, not anyone else's here, but it's somebody's going to have to cut out the template for the printing is very expensive. So there's endless problems. Yeah. To be honest, I think we're drawing a line at working in Europe and going to look outside, which unfortunately I think is what the government wants us to do.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's because the problem is, you know, the alternative is to create work that is tourable, but then that has huge implications on your kind of artistic voice and what you're trying to do.
No, I mean, the show is very tourable, but it's not like, I don't wish to do, it's not like an acrobatic or a dance company who are the performers. And they maybe have a sound system and some costumes. Yeah. So I'm generalizing here. Not all do, but it's a different thing. It's very specific objects that are made to create a very specific event. Yeah. And we're just thinking, we've worked in Korea and Taiwan and Singapore and places where because we're not traveling in a van, the festivals understand what the freight is, and the whole system can get things through freight very quickly. But Europe, because we've been so used to, we all know what the problems are, so I won't reiterate them. But
yeah, no, and that's why I think it's important to still lobby that we don't get lost in all these discussions, because, you know, otherwise this could carry on. I do think we have some way in lobbying, and I think as the performing arts sector in particular, we have to be very effective as having a kind of a unified voice. And that's why I sort of mentioned the European movement, because they have a cohort of MPs that already signed up, and it's cross-sector. And so I went recently to a meeting, and you've got people from the science sector, you know, medicine, science, business, all various sectors, and collectively and sharing the issues that people have. And I think it's still just really important to raise that over the next couple of years while we're going through this sort of thorny situation, because otherwise there's no one sort of fighting to solve the problem. And I think the festivals and the venues that are hosting are equally going through the nightmare that this is. So it's, yeah, I haven't got a useful answer.
No, I don't know.
Bearer of bad news.
I don't want to sort of shovel gloom onto this meeting, obviously, because other people have.
No, and you know, it is complicated. Like I said, there's no doubt about it. It is complicated. There are cost implications, but hopefully what has happened in the last couple of years is people like myself and Extracts and others have tried to provide an overview and guidance so that some of the pain of the research of where to look has taken. And the reason why, this is a Google Doc is that it's changing. So the links should link you to the places with the latest information as it's live and happening, because it is changing. It is changing. But
yes, I mean, I think the outdoor sector is, the difficulty is that it's not a play or a concert. It's people doing strange things with strange materials in unfamiliar ways.
Yeah.
So we kind of slip out. There's got to be some way of sort of getting people aware of that. This is what we're dealing with, hybrids rather than.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely, and I think that's where Irene and Sylvia will feed in here, is that they are very much speaking on behalf of the sector and about the complexities of what that means specifically.
Yeah, I think just to kind of reiterate, obviously there's a lot of challenges, but at the moment, because of the lack of international touring in the past 2 years, it's really tricky to show exactly what's happened in those different circumstances, because we just simply haven't had the experience. We haven't had the opportunity to go out there. So I think this summer is going to be really crucial for us to gather data and evidence on the outdoor companies that are able to go and have bookings in those different countries, to then kind of be able to say, right, this didn't work this way, and this is the guidance that we had, but actually when it came to it, it didn't work that way, and this is what we found, and this is what we need to change, and to kind of build it from there. I think at the moment, as Nadine was saying, the only thing that we can do is very much kind of just work on a bit of a checklist and support people to try to understand what are the complications that may arise and what implications that may have in terms of capacity, in terms of kind of financially as well. What does that mean? But ultimately, until we are able to go, it'll be really difficult for us to kind of match that with a reality. So we're hoping that that's an exercise we'll be able to do at the end of this summer season, and just to continue building on that. And you're absolutely right, Edward, in that it's a very different sector. The length of tours is very different, and the way that people travel and what they do and what they take with them is very different. But unless there's a little bit of experience there for custom officers more than anyone really, as well as for the people traveling, but it's kind of a system that involves so many different people that it needs a little bit of that.
Yeah, and we are seeing impact in the sense that recently, so for example with Spain, the new visa requirements that were applied, well, at the beginning in the summer, when students were applying to go and study in Spain, they needed new visa paperwork completed, and post-Brexit, and Spain is one of the top destinations for higher education students in the UK, and the embassies just couldn't cope, and so then they were quite willing to sort of slightly change and tweak the visa system, which then applies to performing arts as well, because they were like, actually, we cannot process this. We cannot process this number all the time. So let's just make things a little bit easier. So I think as numbers start to move, and it's not just the performing arts, but people start to move again, we will see some positive outcomes, hopefully, as individual countries realise, okay, actually, this legislation doesn't work with this flow and number of people. I'll just go back quickly to the guide, because I'm conscious of time and I just want to do a couple more countries and have a bit of a Q&A. But then, following on with the step-by-step, we then talk about insurance and travel, which we covered in the overview. I've added a little bit of links in the packs that I've drawn about mobility funding guides. So some mobility funding guides that apply for certain countries, about who helps support for funding. So sometimes your host organisation may not be aware of some of the funding pots that are available to you, to them to apply for you to come, and vice versa. So it's sometimes worth a look as well. I've added a link, so if you are non-British passport holders, what are the implications for you? And similarly, if in this case you would have an Italian collaborator coming to the UK, what is the implication for them? And so that sort of format I've sort of used for all the countries. I'm just going to deep dive into another country now, just to give you a sense of how different it is to Italy, and so that you can just see. So one second while I click onto another shared screen. So let's do the Netherlands, which is slightly less painful. So if we look at the Netherlands, so bearing in mind, you didn't need a visa in Italy, but you did need a work permit, and there was a lot of paperwork to fill in. So first of all, similar to the UK arts info points, the Dutch have a Dutch culture mobility info, and they're actually really, really good. So if you have any questions because you're going to Holland or the Netherlands, you know, have a little look and speak to them direct. So for visas, there's no visa required. For work permits, if you're working on a one-off short engagement for less than 6 weeks, you should be exempt. Okay, if you're doing more than 6 weeks, then there is a work permit that is required, and you can be applied. It has to be applied by the host organisation. There's no cost for work permits for up to 90 days, so there's no actual additional cost, but there is the paperwork. And this is, you know, another thing of like, you know, never anything clear, but if you're working for a maximum of 6 continuous weeks within a period of 13 weeks, then you have to apply for an application for work in paid employment. But you don't need a single permit in this situation. You would just apply for something that would cover that engagement. And there is a minimum income requirement for your stay over, not size, but 6, nice typo, to show. So, and the amount depends. So basically what they're saying is, we want to know that you've got a certain amount in the bank to cover your stay, but depending on who you are and what your role is, that amount might fluctuate. Okay, and then you need to provide a CV and the contract that you've got from the host organisation. They're completely set of different rules. This was the whole argument always during the referendum, is that the EU isn't this enormous body. Every country is independently in control of their borders, as was the UK. And so, you know, not to worry about it, but obviously that didn't go through. So here's the sort of step-by-step guide for the Netherlands and what you can do. Same things apply for A1 forms, etc., etc. Though they tend to be a little bit more lenient in regarding having to have that upfront. But like I said, it's best to have it regardless, because you're supposed to. I'm just going to scroll down and see if there's anything specific. Yeah, so yeah. Right, so yeah, so similarly, there is a breakdown depending on in terms of tax. So if, for example, you have received Arts Council funding for your show, then you can be exempt additionally from your for taxation in the Netherlands. So if ACE has funded the creation of your show, and has funded more than 50% of the budget of the show, then there are other tax exemptions and that you can apply for as well, which applies in the Netherlands but doesn't apply for in Italy. I've just added this Pearl tax cookbook which shows you all of that, so you're just clear about what you can claim exactly. Same thing about moving your equipment, exactly the same thing as Italy, but you know, there's added links to the Dutch customs and so the Italian customs, so you can see with them ATA is the same, all the rest is the same really, just different requirements for driving, which you can check through the RAC, and I think that's kind of all covered as well. Same different funding guide to help with the mobility and what happens if you're a non-British passport holder and where to go and so on and so forth. So you'll see that step-by-step process of moving you is the same. It's just a different set of links. So I will now just go to France because that's more a headache.
Good idea. Let's do the headache countries and then.
I mean, the most headachy bit will be tax and work permits. With everything else, all the other countries, it pretty much applies as the same. It's just a different set of links, and there might be some slightly different cost implications. So with them, I mentioned the Dutch cultural info point. France have got Mobiculture, which is an information point as well. It should be absolutely your first call if you go to France and you've never been to France before. Just say, this is my engagement, this is what I've been asked, and send it to them. Don't try and work it all out on your own. That's what they're there for. So let them help you as well, and they can help you directly. I've also added a couple of other links because there are some other bodies like the SSD, which is like the PRS. So if you're doing a show that does have a bit of text, there are different kinds of, or music, there are different implications for that as well. You don't need a visa. For performing artists and technicians, so not directors, working for 3 months or less, you don't need a temporary work permit. So that makes it very easy. If you are traveling and you're not these roles, there might be other implications to your work permit. But if you're a performing artist and a technician working for 3 months or less, you don't require a temporary work permit. No paperwork there. So actually, I just said the French for the worst, but actually on that front, it's all much easier. The new post-Brexit legislation, which will, for France in terms of social security, is if an artist is working in the performing arts sector, they have to, this is the kind of issue around why can't you use a French performer to do what you're doing, right? So you have to declare the activity before you go through this SIPSI portal. And what they do is they have a special department, the Labour Inspectorate, who will check your contract and so on and so forth. The aim is slightly to make sure that you are paid and are contributing on an equal basis to a potential French performer and you're not undercutting. So it's just to make sure that you are doing everything legally in the UK, and there really is no reason why you couldn't then get somebody locally to do what you're coming over to do. Is that in a nutshell. So you would have to, before you go, fill in the form, show the contract, explain what the situation is. So there is no, it's about competition really. You will also need proof of finances, which is has to be kind of matching what they offer in France. So that can sometimes be problematic because the French pay their performers a bit better than we often do. So it's just about showing, you know, that there isn't that undercutting. And you might have to show that you are self-employed if you are self-employed by, for example, giving you a unique taxpayer reference number and so on and so forth. So it's worth taking a bit of time looking at this employee status and how it compares and the new paperwork you have to provide, which you didn't have to do before. If you're paid through an arts organisation, so if you're a company and you're bringing performers, then you will have to demonstrate the employment contract through SERFA, which is like HMRC, have it stamped and proved, and similarly prove that you are being paid the equivalent of 70% of the minimum legal wage in France. And you also, it has to demonstrate that you're paying the people that are working for you through payroll and not by an invoice, and it matches French union rate. So that's where it gets a little bit more complicated. If you're going to be working in France, you definitely need your A1 form. There are many people have not been able to perform without having that paperwork up front. And I'm just looking to see if there's anything specific to France in terms of double taxation. no, just they have the same subsidised tax rebate deal as Holland has, so it's worth having a look at that. But I think everything else is almost the same, except for with driving, as I mentioned earlier on. There are, in most French cities, you would need this extra vignette, which costs about €4.51 and stops you being fined in terms of travelling at certain times through the city because of the low emission zones and the anti-pollution policies that certain cities will have. So there's just a couple of things that you might need to just have a little look at. And I think actually on top of this, which I haven't added, which I really should do, is that you do need a breathalyzer test in your car if you're traveling through France, which you don't need in other countries. And you have to have one at all times in your car. So there's a couple of things like that that are specific to France. But the rest is kind of the same as everywhere else. Just do, sorry, I'm aware that I have spoken at length at everybody. I haven't given you any chance to even have a toilet break, but let's just crack on. We've got a couple more countries. I'll just do one more country and then we'll do a Q&A because I am aware of time. So let me just have a little look at Spain and then I'll stop with the countries because I'll send a link to this so you can have a look at all the guides. So with Spain, there isn't a mobility point, which is a nightmare. There's no national organisation that sort of represents the whole of Spain. This is the change that I was saying. So because of the student issue that Spain faced, they then changed this particular C-type EET visa, which was previously required, which means that you can now, as an artist, perform in Spain for 5 consecutive days or 20 performance days within a 6-month period without the need of this visa. So that applied before and that has been fixed and changed. So, but you can find all the information here regarding what that waiver means. There are lots of different kinds of visa requirements depending, and again, please jump in if any of this is incorrect, but from my understanding, it all really depends on the length of your engagement and what you're doing and where you're going. And you have to schedule, similar to Italy, this kind of lead up frame of up to 3 months to take an account of when scheduling your work of all these paperwork that you will need to apply for going there. But that's it. Whereas there are other countries that exempt you completely. So, you know, I've just kind of picked some of the ones which do have paperwork, so you can see, but you could also see the variety of the number of forms that you might have to fill in. I'm going to stop sharing that screen and go back to where we were. Right. This feels awful as well because I'm normally a real like, come on, let's do it. Let's, you know, it's, you know, I just feel really like, oh, at the end of this one. But I'm hoping a lot of the pain has been removed in some sense. In terms of signposting, as I mentioned, the PEL is the Live Performance Europe have really comprehensive guides, read tax, social security, where it really breaks it down to the percentage on everything. So it's really worth looking at. Mobility info points don't exist in every country, but where they do, it's worth a look. The UK Arts Info Point lists and links to all the European ones, so that's a good way of doing it. There are guides, such as the one that I've just presented, which is the Arts Admin Guide, which I co-wrote. Extracts Guide is excellent, and their case studies are really brilliant as well. UK Theatre have lists of resources related to Brexit. The Musicians Union Guide, I would say, is really worth looking at as well. They have all sorts of information. One Dance UK does. Freelancers make theatre work as well. And then there are networks, European networks, which also are doing a lot of signposting and lobbying and presentation, including in situ, caravan, ITM, Mobility Arts International, Disability Arts International, sorry, and so on and so forth. So there are a whole bunch of people who are doing what we are doing, and signposting and lobbying as well. ITM is the Informal European Theatre Members Network, and they're often alongside Stöckersgada and Caravan in Situ, the sort of bodies that the EU will go and speak to, who as the sort of lobbying on behalf of the sector. So if you are speaking to hosts in a European country, if they can lobby through those networks, those are the ones that have access at European Commission level. So they're worth looking at. Questions.
Really brilliant kind of tour around Brexit. Definitely a lot to mull over. Thank you for that. Yeah, over to you. If you have any questions, Edward, Anya, Ni, you can just unmute yourselves and ask the question directly.
I did have a question and I've forgotten it. No, one thing I would say for anyone that with the needing to get the double taxation things, is that the British Tax Office is incredibly slow. It is, so try and get that. I guess it's changed in since Brexit, but no one ever asked us for that except for a couple of big French festivals, and for some reason some festivals in the east of Belgium, but otherwise no one was remotely interested. But I guess that's all changed. But the British, I would just say the tax office is incredibly slow, so that stuff, along with everything else, needs to be sorted out as quickly as possible. Otherwise,
I've also, I mean, also the fact that trying to apply for a British passport at the moment is almost impossible. But you know, another thing that's really slow is people who've been applying for access to work, and in travelling to Europe, I know that processing that has been incredibly slow as well. In terms of, so there's, I think, you know, all the departments are really struggling with this new legislation themselves. So it's the longer lead up frame that you can have, or the lighter you're able to travel at the moment until things fall into place. Anya, I saw you unmuted yourself. I didn't know if you had a...
No, not really. I was just about to say, like, I haven't really got a question, so it's just been very comprehensive. Thanks, Nadine. Just quite overwhelming, I have to say.
Yeah,
I mean, my urge to go touring internationally, I'm like, yes. And
no, I mean, the thing I would say is, like I said, think of it for the moment like the US.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Everyone accepts the pain of going to America.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to start thinking of Europe for now, like as if you got an American gig, which means lots of time to fill in lots of complicated paperwork, which may make no sense, but you have to do it. And you know, and just to go through that process. And like I said, hopefully the difference is if you do have those conversations and if you do have those invitations, there are guides which will help you to get there and to go through that. And we've collated all that kind of click on here, click on there, which, to be honest, 90% of what I've presented applied pre-Brexit. Okay, you had to do A1 forms before. Mm-hmm. Double taxation existed before, you know, like that's not changed. So it's you know, but it's also, I think what has changed is maybe the willingness to let certain things slide, whereas before people might be a bit more casual about the number of papers they would expect you to present. There are, you know, that people might be feeling a bit more hesitant in doing that at present. So yeah, I mean, there is also, you know, obviously the focus here has been very much on Europe post-Brexit, but there are other ways of travelling beyond Europe and other guides for other countries, other continents, and yeah, it might be easier to go to Chaliwate in Ghana than it is to Aurillac in France at the moment. I don't know. We'll have to see.
I would also say that when we started, we used to, and we got work abroad, we used to go to Natural Theatre, who toured a lot abroad, and they had a wealth of experience of what you need to do, and they were very pleased to share that experience. But I would imagine that, I think probably a group like Motion House, they won't thank me for dumping everyone on them, but the that kind of asking those kind of questions, because their work is specific, rather than, like I said, with the arts admin one of forced entertainment is kind of interesting, but not really very helpful, because we don't.
That's exactly right. I
would have a look on the arts admin one though. We did speak to Sonia Hughes. It's an outdoor piece. It's an independent. You know, she's not NPO. So there are other case studies as well. But obviously, it was more for the performing arts sector, because Extract had focused on the outdoor sector, so we didn't want to repeat it. But I think Stopgap as well are a great source, because they travel so extensively and have such, you know, they often tour with people who have got British passports, don't have British passports, doing outdoor work and so on and so forth. And I found them very helpful as well. They might not thank me either for saying that, but they are an Extract case study, I'm pretty sure. So, but there are certain companies, I think. And you know, hopefully these sort of sessions are as well about slightly demystifying it a little bit, but it's about capacity really, and sharing this with the host organisations as well, so they're clear at their end about what's required, because they won't know any more than we do in certain cases, you know, if they don't do a lot of third country invitations.
Just on that point of kind of sharing experience, I just wanted to point you to the latest Dealing with Brexit open conversations that we had, because that was with Mimbre and the Show Globe after they'd just been to City of Wings Festival in Belgium, and they were actually kind of talking about their experience there. And really funny that you mentioned Motion House, Edward, because we actually have Louise joining us for the next kind of Dealing with Brexit conversation on the 24th of May. And she has about 7 dates kind of planned for the summer in different European countries. So the idea is for her to kind of tell us a little bit about where she's at in terms of the planning, and then to come back in September, October to tell us what actually happened and what that experience was like. And she was very happy to kind of share that. And you know, just, I know it can be really overwhelming, and it still is for a lot of us that have been involved in this activity for the past couple of years. But I think it is just that willingness of kind of sharing experiences is to try and help everyone kind of understand what's happening. And also, you know, in terms of the kind of mentality of international promoters, of just reminding them that it is possible, and that we kind of know how to do it. It's just about feeling a little bit more empowered. But there is a bit of a gap in terms of us being able to go get out there, which hasn't been, you know, possible with the pandemic, obviously. So we're kind of in a bit of a limbo, I feel. But there's definitely more clarity as we kind of go.
And I know, I mean, I'm working on the Caravan Assembly in Brighton at the end of May, and there will be lots of European promoters coming for the first time there. So it'll be interesting to sort of speak to them. But Farnham Maltings as well I've been in conversation with them as they've been going through processes of going to Spain for gigs and saying, okay, this is what worked and this is what isn't working, and so on and so forth. So I think all those organisations across our sector who are doing that international travelling, it's about just really us sharing experiences and then seeing if we can fix things, or at least lobby for what we can.
I was wondering, Nadine, if you had any kind of bits of advice for the companies here present around contracting, because I know you mentioned a kind of note on, you know, the fact that you kind of need to check whether your performers do still have an allowance to go out to Europe on the dates that you want. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that and on how to go about that, and also timings for just getting contracts from kind of international partners in Europe? Because you mentioned ideally you want like a two month lead in time, don't you, to
because
do all
of
that
the paperwork.
planning?
Yeah, so I think it's about really being really very demanding up front about needing those things in place, which normally, I sometimes signed the contract when I got there, which that's just not possible now. That's just not possible. It's like we need that up front. I think it's going to need a little bit of tougher negotiation skills. Like I said, being really clear about I'm expecting this money in my bank at this, as British sterling, and there not being any fluctuation. And this is where it's about working more collaboratively and sharing our knowledge and experience and saying, look, this is what it is. We've got these guides for the UK because you need to read this as well, because you have to have that. I think there's all sorts of things that are happening as well in terms of contracting performers in the UK, in terms of being really aware of, like I said, where they're travelling, their 90 days out of 180. Same with vaccine passports, bit of an issue. I know lots of people, and this is really, going to be worrying practice, that are only employing EU passport holders based in the UK, or only employing people who have the right vaccine passports for the moment. So there's going to be all sorts of things that you just got to keep an eye on. But I think it's going to be about, it's really, it's so, that question is so dependent on how experienced you are and how willing you are to push back. If it's your first gig, it's really hard to make those pushbacks. So I think it's about making sure that people understand and work with you collaboratively to make the engagement happen, and the requirement that they have to kind of make it easy as well for you, because the bulk of the work will land on you, not on them, unless they happen to be Festival d'Automne or others, which are used to having third country performers all the time. So this is no big deal for the bigger, having someone over from Thailand will be no different to having us. So it's usual stories for them.
I think that's a really important point though, Nadine, because I think it is kind of, in our discourse, is going to set the tone for the kind of conversations that we're having. So, that thing of kind of going, sadly, we're now a third country and we need to think about things logistically as if we were coming from Korea or from the US.
Yeah.
That I think that is something that's quite useful, but to then kind of accompany that by, we know what we need to do. I'm just letting you know that it is a little bit more complicated at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, all the paperwork will be the same, just the transport would be cheaper. But yeah, just to remind them that all that means is that it's as if you were bringing somebody from one of those countries, which obviously, depending on the size of the organisation, not all people will be doing that. But I think there is also lots of talk, across Europe about this. This isn't something that we're thinking about in a vacuum. There are lots of networks that are thinking about this to facilitate it. People are looking at different models of touring. People are thinking different ways of collaboration, different ways of presentation, because we're all aware of these issues, and it's not just about legislation, it's about the concept of touring as a whole. So it will be up for discussion, definitely.
I would say that I think that often with outdoor work, the touring is quite different from a theatre show, because very often it wasn't the case maybe 20 years ago when there were gigs on Wednesdays and Tuesdays and Thursdays, but mainly the outdoor scene has become weekends, and maybe the Friday festivals are 3 days, some of the bigger ones are 4 days. So what we used to do was if we had two consecutive weekends, we'd fly back and leave the van in at a friend's or somebody in the festival who would be happy to have a van park near where they are. So I don't know, that kind of complicates things in terms of coming back in and out. But it also, if you have a 90-day you're only allowed 90 days, the less days you spend there means that you can, you're not breaking on, you're not impinging on that.
Exactly, you're not losing those days for no reason. Yeah, absolutely.
And also for the cost of the company as well, keeping four performers sort of accommodated and fed with no income coming in is obviously not always feasible. But I'm going to have to go soon, but could I ask, well, thanks very much for this, but could I ask, will Extracts be doing sort of case studies on some of the written ones? Because I'm an old person. I find video evidence quite difficult to carry on watching. Where there are it's possible to have written case studies of companies who've been over there, and just with some quite detailed questions about what they had to do and what their experience of it. Because we spoke to somebody who literally worked, he worked in south of France and Italy last year. He just went to Eurotunnel, booked a ticket and got on, and just drove he has a transit van, no questions asked. He just went and did it and then came back again. But obviously he's going to Belgium in a month, and we're asking for him to do a case study of what happened there. I think it'll be a lot more difficult, but it's just useful to have, because things subtly change all the time, and there are sort of rules and things that don't appear to apply and things. So it'd be just useful to have that as some documentation, so that just to help.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have the kind of case studies that we did when we were thinking about preparing for Brexit, which are on our guide, which is on our website, but it's all written, and that's where kind of stopgap appears and things like that. We also have notes from the dealing with Brexit conversations where, for example, like I was saying before, Mimbre and the Show Globe explain kind of quite in detail what they went through. But we do want to this summer just gather a few case studies of people who have been and kind of write them down so that they're ready for, after the summer for us to kind of have a look at, and also document and evidence the bookings that haven't happened in a way, because that's also really important for us to be able to share that information around, for example, Edward, the booking that you had and you're no longer able to do it because of the cost implications and all of those kind of things. It's also using that. So we're thinking about sending out a survey of some sorts. So yeah, you'll definitely hear from us, and there will be more kind of outdoor art specific case studies after the summer.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and bye-bye, everyone.
Good luck.
I had a question, Nadine, which was around if you are, for example, taking a group of kind of performers to Europe to not only do a performance, but also do sort of wraparound activity for which you may have a slightly different contract.
Yeah, so there will be different things if you're teaching, doing a residency sort of thing. So yeah, there will be. So a lot of the links that I've done to the country's immigration overviews will tell you if it's a teaching engagement, then this applies. If it's not, so certain countries it will be the same, and others no, they will be a different thing. But yes, there will be no doubt different paperwork to fill
so
in.
it's kind of like community engagement activity counted as teaching ultimately, to kind of categorize it separately from a performance, I guess.
It kind of depends on how they're paying you, I guess. So if it can be included in your fee and it's kind of just an activity, you might get away from it. But if it's kind of like a separate contract for that activity, then yeah, it probably would then fall into that category. It's best to check on a case-by-case basis. But yeah, then that becomes more complicated. Because there's also some situations where people are offered paid residencies and so on and so forth around a performance, and that has a different sort of cost implication as well. But yeah, teaching doesn't have the same rules depending on where you go.
Right. I had another question, which was, you talked about kind of different resources for financial support for international mobility to Europe. And I wondered if is there anything that's kind of not particularly country specific, but is there anything that's more global that is worth just highlighting at this stage? Or do you know if anything that might be in the making?
In terms of, so creative, so the EU has set up a portal, and if I haven't got it on the link, I can certainly share it afterwards, which kind of is the portal to all their funding that they now do to support the creative sector. Otherwise, ITM have a really good mobility funding guide section, and there they do it for all countries, actually, all continents, sorry, in some countries. So that's where you can go and see how you can apply for funding to go, and which ones are regular open calls, which are one-off, and which one host organisations can apply to support you to come over. And so there are certain Scandinavian, the Nordic Arts Fund, for example, is quite easy to apply on a regular basis, and there are certain times of the year where you can do that, and so on and so forth, where other ones are more sporadic. So the ITM publications, I think, are quite good on the mobility funding guide. I co-wrote one for Africa a few years ago, and it was just about what all the calls are and which organisations to look at. But I think the main thing to do is to try and spend the next, I mean, I was thinking of you, Anya, in particular, because you probably come to these events and then think, oh my God, is to try and to go, see if it's possible to apply for a bit of funding through Develop Your Creative Practice or other sources of funding, to do a bit of a recce so that you can start going over to places so that you can see where you want to focus your time and energy. Because, it's clearly incredibly time consuming. So if that's going to distract you from what you're doing locally, where are the best places to go? Are there a couple of places, key moments that you might want to try and connect with networks, be it at a festival or a conference, and see whether you can speak to people and develop the relationships in that way, so then you know where to focus your energy. Because otherwise, if you're looking at this as a whole, it's completely overwhelming, and could be really off-putting. Whereas if you can just spend the next sort of, instead of just waiting for the invitation, start having those conversations and building it, it might seem more feasible. And there are, priority countries that ACE has identified in terms of wanting to support exchanges. And as an organisation, if you can fold that into Develop Your Creative Practice in terms of doing those go-see visits and network building and better understanding, then you know where to focus your time and energy and not distract you on a local basis, which I think is really important.
Maybe just a quick question in there with the creative or developing your creative practice, because I'm very much the company just in motion, and a lot of other people. But if I personally apply for the fund to develop my own creative practice, but I use it for those conversations, I'm not sure if that is even possible. Because if I would do that as an independent artist, then that is possible. But because I would do it specifically for the company, it doesn't usually apply.
But that doesn't, if you are the company, I don't think that matters to you, apply as yourself, because that knowledge will and network building will reside in you forever. So just, you can apply for it as an individual and feed that knowledge into your company, but that you're developing that side of your knowledge and skills. And because I think anyway, programming, yes, we are seeing a lot of festivals this summer, but a lot of the programming has been very last minute, has been dependent as well on prior engagements, what's around, So I think it's about thinking about the next 12 to 18 months and seeing if there's ways of doing it that way. Well, that makes sense. I don't know, Nee, if you had any anything you wanted? I saw you popped a few things in the chat. I hope we've responded to that.
Yeah. No, I'm just benefiting from all the questions that's already going on, and yeah, I also feel like, well, I should rather kind of go through all of these and then see how best I can approach them. I did in the past approach extracts whenever I've gone into a concrete wall, and then I do get some response back. So that's good. All I want, I'm a little bit slow in reading. And so all of this is kind of rather what I'm going to retain in my brain for a long time.
Yeah.
But that's why I kept asking for links so that I'm able to revisit it and put markers wherever possible. Yeah.
I don't think anybody could. I mean, I've written it and I can't retain it all. Don't worry. The main thing is, what I really hope at the end of this workshop is that you're like, okay, I know where to go.
Yeah.
I know where to go to get the research, to start looking. When people start talking to me about these things, I know where to look. I can start diving in. I can start doing the research. I feel like I can start the initial thing. Don't respond to everything that you see on Twitter. There's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of up in arms. There's a lot of people saying things which, you know, I understand, but often are knee-jerk reactions. I mean, there's some beautiful stuff on Twitter as well and very helpful. But sometimes people go, oh my God, we're not allowed to do this. And actually, if you look at the detail, we are. So just, you know, take a step back, look at what there are. All the links are there. You should be able to sort of figure out how to get yourself to this country. I mean, I have to say the guide that I've written is by no means comprehensive. It doesn't cover every single European country, but we focused it on the ones that are most likely to be top of the list for artists traveling.
For me, another interesting thing is that, I mean, even though I've been in the country for 9 years, I still have to apply for visas wherever I go. So when it comes to the visa question or issue of the visas, I'm not like very much freaked out about it. I know it has been my life for a long time. And also knowing that once you've done that, what do my people say? My people say if you put a corn in the mill, you get a condo come out, that kind of thing. So it's for me having that assurance, and most of the time it's hard to get the specific answer and specific help, because my form is into African dance, and most of the time people just put it in the box of ticking the box of diversity and those kind of things. But when you approach certain companies, because people who are doing anything with African dance, whether it's loosely or really deep into it, it's like every document or all the cards are kept to their chest. So when it comes to...
Well, Nee, I'm just going to shout out here and say that I have worked extensively supporting African artists in particular work internationally. And you have my contact details, my website details there, on my email is on there as well, but I can put it there. I am more than happy to have a conversation with you post and point you in the right direction, because that is slightly my field of expertise outside of this one. So and I'm really, you know, have any information that you need on that front, I will share with you gladly.
Thank you very much.
I'll pop in my email now and we can have a conversation outside of this.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that offer, Nadine. That's great. And also just on that point, I wanted to point out that Extracts is actually offering free 30-minute advice sessions on kind of visa. So we've partnered up with Viva La Visa to support UK outdoor artists in kind of, you know, answering specific questions around visa and work permits that you might need to tour to a specific country, and kind of how to apply to those, because the kind of knowledge on those is very specific. We obviously don't have all of that knowledge yet. We will get there eventually. And so we're offering that kind of free service. So to do that, all you need to do is just fill in a really quick kind of online form on our website. And my colleague Sylvia will just pop the link in there faster than lightning. There you go.
Have you got one on haulage and freight? Because I want to sign up to it as well.
And we also have a partnership for kind of ATA Kana training. And that is a kind of aimed at companies that have confirmed or firm penciled bookings, just because we don't have that much time with kind of partner organization for that one. But if you do have interest in, like, you know, your show being taken to a European country and you're not sure about how to do an ATA Kana and you need kind of that training, do drop us an email and we can kind of link you up to that partner that's going to help you figure all of those things out. So yeah, those are the two kind of little additional bits of information that I wanted to share with you. And I guess we should probably wrap up.
Sorry,
yeah.
before we wrap up, one thing. Before kind of coming to the meeting, I was thinking that I will go away with sort of a map post-Brexit of where to start touring once you approach someone or someone approach you, like sort of a step-by-step, even if it's just bullet points. And then you know exactly what the procedure is for you to follow, because some of these hyperlinks will keep going on and on and on. And it will be good to some point bring you back to base and then go on, if there is anything like this.
So I'm not entirely sure, but in terms of like a map, the closest I can think of is like in the guide that I've mentioned, the breakdown per country, and that's kind of like held in one place. But I'm not sure if I fully understood what you were looking for there. I mean,
like, what are the things that you need to look at, for example, as a kind of start, as like the base? Because if that is the case, then I think there's quite a good checklist on the kind of guide that we created, which we'll put the link in there as well. They're very similar in that sense, aren't they, the checklist bit?
Exactly. So I think between extracts and the arts and admin, if you put them together, that should give you that comprehensive overview that you're looking for. But
yeah, have a look at those and drop us an email if you have any kind of specific questions.
Thank you very much.
We're really happy to continue talking.
Thank you.
Brilliant. All right, well, thank you everybody for attending the session. We hope you found it fruitful and not too overwhelming. Thank you so much as well to Nadine for sharing your expertise with us today. As we mentioned earlier, we'll have a free Dealing with Brexit open conversation session next Tuesday, 24th of May, with Louise Richards from Motion House, who will talk about her extensive experience touring around Europe and beyond, and how Brexit is kind of impacting the processes and planning of her European touring. And finally, while I've still got your attention, I just wanted to remind you again about our practical guide for Brexit and the resources that we have on the Extracts website, which my colleague Sylvia has been putting in the chat. And also we will send you the links and the kind of slides and everything, just so you have a little bit more time to digest everything. We don't expect you to kind of go away from this session and know everything, but rather just to know that you're not on your own in this journey, and that there is a bit of a kind of joint effort going on here. So hopefully we will all be able to find a solution and a way to navigate this. So thanks again, everybody, and we hope to see you again very soon. Take care.
See you later. Bye.